All right, welcome everyone. I want to have a little bit of an honest discussion with you all about pain. Um, I've had some hip pain on my right hip lately, and I think it's a great example or an opportunity to talk about this. When you are pushing yourself, you're going to have aches and pains. I'm not training to not have myself go through intense exercises. And with intense exercise, the physics is simple. You're imposing lots of physical load on your body, lots of miniature collisions with the ground over and over again. And in turn, you have to pay the piper sometimes. And the physics adds up and you get aches and pains. By the way, excuse me, I just got done running outside. So it's cold out and I have a little bit of a stuffy nose, so I'll apologize in advance. Let's set the situation up. First off, by the way, before I go into this, when you go on social media, people are going to tell you you shouldn't get hurt. I do all this and I never have any aches and pains. You know what? It's really easy to not have any aches and pains if you just lift weights and don't do anything else. But when you try and do something intense, you're going to have situations of pain that occur. And there's kind of three. I'm not a medical doctor. I'm not a medical expert. This is how I look at it. There's acute pain. You did something in the moment. You sprained an ankle. Ow, that hurt. You cut yourself. There's a direct situation of high loading of force, whether it's like literally cutting your skin and the force of breaking the skin or the ankle rolling. And in that moment of force, you had an inadequacy to resist that force and you get hurt acutely. Breaking a bone, another example. There are lead up aches and pains. So like overuse injuries, tendonitis. I haven't done something in a while. I start doing something. There's not one direct event. It's kind of an accumulation and a ramping up of pain to a point you might have a tipping point. And the third one is like random pains. And yes, these exist and we don't like to talk about them, but they totally do. Sleep on the wrong side of the bed, did something that's super normal to you, like an activity, I don't know, you do your normal workout and you wake up and something really hurts. You don't know why it hurts, you don't know when it happened, you don't have any reason to believe that there's any buildup to that occurrence. And in that random pains, there's another one where I call it like a subcategory, and this might be where this hip falls into. It's kind of an avoidance pain. So let's get to the hip. About 3 to 4 weeks ago, was jumping outside in my backyard, and I jumped off my right leg. I don't jump off my right leg very often. There's a whole litany of reasons. I'm not here to talk about that, whatever. And it felt fine. I was practicing over and over again, but I was kind of going somewhat intense for something I haven't done in a long time. And then I felt the back of my PSIS, my posterior hip area, kind of tighten up. Pretty normal. Maybe I overstrode on one of my steps and whatnot. In conjunction with this, the weather started to turn. The weather became snowy and icy, and I wasn't able to get outside much. And so what happened was I had this occurrence of a kind of a hip issue. And because I'm not going outside anymore, I actually limited a lot of my running. I would just kind of do acceleration work and sprint work. And then my hip would feel fine enough, kind of achy at times, but nothing crazy. Then a couple of days ago, I went to sprint, upright sprinting, and I was like, oh my gosh, my hip hurt. I physically cannot run a sprint right now. I could play basketball, weirdly enough. I could run, I could jump. I just done a workout. My hip was super lit up. Now, what might have happened, and this is why it's important to walk through this, is called an avoidance pain, where I had some sort of pain. I might have avoided certain actions that elicited that pain, and then my body kind of started to realign itself, for lack of better scientific words, around that pain. Because I haven't sprinted, when you sprint, your hip goes through a pretty full range of motion. You go into large amounts of extension and flexion under a cyclic action, so repeated over and over again, which is why I love sprinting. It's a great exercise for just general range of motion under a pretty high velocity. So I went and ran on Friday, and it was like, oh my gosh, what is that? It almost felt locked up and jammed. So I had a hypothesis, and this is what's really important with your injuries and management of pain and aches, is to not just randomly do things, but have a hypothesis, a thought process behind what might have happened and what might resolve it. So I went back and reflected on some of the stuff, and I said, well, I think it is something to do with that initial kind of tweak I had in my right hip. It never bothered me, but I just kind of avoided it. And kind of based on some testing, I had some deficiencies in end range of motion with my hip flexion. I noticed that into extension when I did my jumps, I had a lot of aches and pains on my right hip because I jump off my left foot and I lift my right leg up. So I think something rotationally occurred where maybe my hip flexor shortened or lost end range of motion in conjunction with lack of lengthening position. And then maybe some of the glute med and groin as well maybe were tight. So my hypothesis was I think I need to start sprinting again and running and not going all out effort, but I need to introduce that dynamic motion in a tolerable pace. And then I need to work on lengthening some of my hip flexor actions through therapeutic means. So maybe some, banded knee flexion, hip flexion type work in a long extension position. But again, because I want to hedge my bets, I not just put all my eggs in one basket. I did some top end position range of motion stuff, almost some, what's the right word, or neural facilitatory performance. What's that called when it's the end something, when it's the stretching? I don't know, I can't remember this name. Neuro, is it facilitated? And it says NF, whatever, NFP, NFT technique, I don't know. Basically, all you do is you go into a contraction and then a lengthening, a contraction and a lengthening, and some isometric holds in between. So I go in like a top end range of motion position, then I press down, then I use my glutes to go into something. And again, I expect, by the way, some aches and pains when I do this because I'm eliciting change through stress. I'm probably going to have some soreness and tightness. So I had some hypothesis around that. I also thought maybe general motion around the area would be beneficial, some rotational work, some lateral side bending, some light stretching and movement. But mainly the big chunk of it being like the 70% of it going towards like the running, the hip flexor work, maybe some glute activation work, and the other 30% kind of a hedged bet. I went and ran today outside, which is why I said my nose is a little runny and it's cold out, and I feel so much better just compared to yesterday, and not even thinking about that compared to Friday. With that in mind, I have an increase in my ability to perform. I have less pain per input. That's a good thing. Too often with myself, you might try to avoid total pain. I had a wonderful lecture, whatever. I went to Altus, and they had a talk, and they talked about how progress isn't, for an athlete, isn't always measured in no pain, but per input relative pain. Because you can get better by doing more and maybe having the same amount of discomfort. Pain's a tough word to use. Maybe I'll use discomfort. Or maybe the same amount of effort and less discomfort, less pain. So if I'm doing more and I'm eliciting equal or less response to the issue, the area, then that's progress. And already off the bat, it feels so much better. And this is during that acute phase, first 3 days of kind of targeted loading of that hip musculature. So it's promising, and I'm excited about the progress versus it being a demoralizing process. And that's why I wanted to have this discussion here, because it's about the management of issues, not the somehow I'm going to have it be totally healed. Because I physically cannot run the risk of taking 3 weeks off to hope it gets better. And first off, maybe come back and it's not better. Then what? I'm from square one again? Or maybe I then take 3 weeks off and it is better, but now I'm 3 weeks behind and I'm already trying to do something that's very aggressive on my body. So I wanted to share that with you all here. And some modifications I might do. I might do a little bit less single foot jumping earlier this week. Maybe do more 2 foot, because in a single foot jump, you have a large trail leg. That is my right leg, that right hip. And to a jump, it's an aggressive hip flexion. So maybe that causes some aches and pains. And instead of doing that, I might do some sprinting or upright running, tempo runs. Like I said, I went outside and ran today for longer distance at a better intensity with higher acceleration with far less pain. So very positive start right now. I'm gonna keep working at it, and I'm not gonna neglect it. I don't call these rehab exercises per se. I'm not gonna do them on my left leg necessarily. I call it therapeutic. I have a reason why it might have happened. And then I'm going to try and regain my motion and rebuild it through tolerable loads. And then eventually progress into normal intensity life without those therapeutic means and methods having to be used, but in my back pocket in case I need them. So I hope that makes sense, and I hope you guys enjoy this honest discussion around pain and being someone who's pushing themselves really hard, because I'm not just trying to get myself back in shape. I'm basically trying to rebuild the house. So I appreciate you guys as always. Thank you, and appreciate you guys following.